We are talking today with Arlo Guthrie, performing in Eau Claire at the State Theater Thursday night. It's the Alice's Restaurant 50th Anniversary Tour. Now, full disclosure, this morning was literally the first time I have listened to Alice's Restaurant Massacree. I've heard about it a little bit, and I'd never listened to all 18 minutes, and I'm glad I did. So, it's a fat... Oh, go ahead.
You're making me laugh. That's great.
It's a fascinating work. Now, there's plenty of stories out about how it's brought back every 10 years and how it all came together. There's plenty, and anyone can search online to find that out. But describe for our listeners, maybe if they're not familiar, maybe if they're like me and just listened to it for the first time, when you initially wrote it, were you thinking, okay, we're just kind of putting this together based on maybe that original original story, the riff involving the initial arrest, or did you think this could be as big as it became?
Well, to truly understand it, you have to go back in time to 1965. I was in college in the fall out in Billings, Montana, studying forestry, and I left for the Thanksgiving vacation and went to visit some friends of mine who were living in an abandoned church in Massachusetts. And we were going to have a big dinner, and I, with a friend of mine, we got together and cleaned up the place. I took all the trash to the local dump, which we discovered was closed on Thanksgiving. And we found a side of a hill where there was some other trash already thrown there, and we decided, hey, might as well get rid of it here. So we did that, went back to the church, and had a nice Thanksgiving dinner. And early the next morning, we got a call from the local chief of police. And to make a long story short, we were arrested for littering. And I decided not to go back to school, even though in those days, if you weren't in school or had some kind of deferment, you were eligible for the selective service, which meant that if you was 18 and you was a guy and you didn't have any deferments, you were pretty much going to Vietnam in those days. But I risked that because I felt like I wanted to be, doing what I do, and I started singing and going around and touring and stuff. And nothing really happened until the spring of the following year, 1966, when I got a call from the military guys saying, hey, you're not in college anymore, buddy. You got to show up here. So I went down there, and they basically let me know that because of my arrest record for littering, that I was not eligible for military service, which cracked me up. I thought, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And so the events took about 6 to 8 months to unfold in a way that I could tell it in a story in the middle of a song. And by the time 1967 rolled around, it had come out as a record. And by 1968, we started working on a movie by the same name, and it came out the following year in 1969, and I've had to deal with it ever since.
And it's long enough that it became popular yet didn't chart. I know there was a single version, got to just barely got into the Hot 100. But on a side note, how do you edit that down? I don't mean literally the recording, obviously, but how do you edit the concept of the song down to a single version when really the story is the story? There's 18 minutes of story there. How does that become a single?
Well, it never really became a single. I think what happened was that when it came out as a record, it was, in those days, what we call albums. So it took one side of an entire LP and one side of an album because it was close to 20 minutes long. And in those days, radio certainly wouldn't play anything over 2.5 minutes, let alone 20. But at the same time, the radio was expanding to include other frequencies and other bandwidths. And FM came into being. And FM was not as restricted as the AM radio had been for decades. And a lot of college stations and a lot of sort of alternative media were beginning to play Alice's Restaurant because they could get away with it. And not only that, nothing was automated. So it gave all the radio guys a 20-minute break.
Mm-hmm.
They could put that thing on, go to the bathroom, go get something to eat, or call a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something like that, and then get back to it and then go back to work. So it started getting a whole lot of airplay in those days. And when it got to be very popular, the company Warner Brothers that I had recorded with said, "Hey, we got to get a small version of this." And I said, "You can't do it. It takes 20 minutes to tell the story. The song is nothing." And so what they had me do was create a sort of single that was called Alice's Rock and Roll Restaurant. Nobody's ever heard of it for good reason. Because you can't, it was, all it was a reference to the larger work. And so it never did anything, and like you said, it didn't chart. But the album was on the charts for 4 years.
Oh.
And that was pretty cool.
Right, lasting as long as that did, and as you mentioned, it started to pick up the concept, the story started to build up into the movie, et cetera, et cetera. But what was maybe the first point, what was the first moment that you sensed, okay, this is building beyond this song and story I've put together? When did you start to maybe get a response from either audiences or culture at large? You go, well, this is becoming, taking on a life of its own.
Well, the first time I played it for live radio was in New York on a publicly sponsored radio. It was called WBAI, and it was late at night, and I went there with some friends of mine, Jerry Jeff Walker and Ramblin' Jack Elliott and some others. We were just carousing around town, and we decided to go up and visit this radio station. And I sang Alice's Restaurant. They got such a big response that they started using it for their fundraising effort. Send us so much money and we'll play it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it got to the point where they were playing it so much that they were saying, send us so much money and we'll stop playing it. And when I realized that it was making them money coming and going, I knew that this was something to be at least dealt with, and we had to make a real record. And so at some point we went into the studio and made a real record out of it, which came out the following year. That was 1966, I think it was first recorded for radio. And by 1967, I knew that this was, I could tell from the response and the audiences that I was playing for that this was different. It was going to keep me going for a while. But, the problem was, of course, so that once everybody had heard it, which took about 5 years, for me to go around the country and play in all these little places I was playing, it took about 5 years. And so somewhere in the early 70s, I realized that everybody had already heard it. I could tell by the audience reaction that they were hearing it for the second or fourth time or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I just took it off the sled. But then I got so many complaints, and people walked in, they bought tickets, and they said, "Hey, you didn't play Alice's Restaurant. I want my money back." And so I could say, "Okay, here's your money back. Don't come back." And at some point I realized that we had to do something. And I was in the same dilemma that Warner Brothers was in. I didn't know how to make it any shorter. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I decided to do it every 10 years for a couple of years. And now we're dealing with the 50th anniversary, which is why we're here.
Doing the 50th anniversary show, of course, at the State Theater Thursday night in Eau Claire, relating it to events of today. And I suppose there's ways that it has been relatable in ways to other current societal happenings, 1975, 85, 95, 2005. Is there something comparable in our society at large that the story of Alice's Restaurant to which it can relate today?
Well, I mean, that's really up for other people to decide. But for me, what made it so funny was the stupidity and the absurdity of people in authority. I mean, you cannot. I mean, when you stop people from entering the military because of a littering conviction, you can't win a war with that kind of thinking. You can't run a country with that kind of thing. You can't run a corporation or a small business with that kind of thing. It is stupid. And so for me, it was always an anti-stupid song. And as long as they're stupid, it will relate to somebody.
Go relating to today, what subjects are you most interested in? If you were writing new music, and side note, I'm a two-part question. A, are you working on any new music or any new content, artist material of any sort? But second, what subjects are most interesting to you right now? What kind of stokes your passion the most at this time?
Well, I think, that to answer your questions sort of as they came, I don't really write anywhere near as much as I used to. On the other hand, I've got over 50 years of stuff, so I can't fit even a few years of it into one night anyway. And so it's kind of pointless. And I'm enjoying what we do. And the second part of your question, I think, is that, there's a spirit to the kind of stuff we do. I mean, folk music is the original social media. Long before there was Facebook or anything else, the way people communicated to each other for the first 30,000 years of being a human was through songs and stories. I mean, that's exactly what all of these other things emulate. And or tales, or this is what I did, or this is what's gone over there, or hey, did you hear about this? I mean, all of those things are what songs and storytellers have been doing for as long as anybody can remember. And it's the spirit to doing that live that we don't tap into so much these days, because we get caught up sitting in front of the computer or doing other things. We're all working, we're all, busy, we got families or we don't, or whatever we got. It's hard to tap into that spirit, but once you do, it's almost like a memory. Even if you've never, like yourself, haven't heard that particular story, you tap into something that's really ancient. And it's the spirit of people sitting around enjoying a good tale. When that happens, it awakens a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with the story. It awakens that process. And for me as an entertainer, that's what interests me today. I mean, we get caught up in the political world, who's running for president, all of which is great and interesting and fun. But, 2 years from now, that'll be done with. But the spirit of people evolving and changing and communicating, that goes on as long as there's going to be people here. And so the art of continuing that interests me, just as an entertainer, as a human being, as a scientist in my own way. That's what captures my attention and my imagination. And I feel like, a link in a very long chain of people who have been doing just that. And to do it well and to make it worthwhile is what, all of us are trying to do.
Do you find any younger artists, either musicians or storytellers in general, that are continuing that thread in younger generations today?
Oh, yeah, there's thousands of them. I mean, they're everywhere. You can't get away from them. And you would have thought in this new technological world or something like that, that would be less, but it's not. It's in fact more, because people have access either through videos or YouTubes or records or CDs or whatever. They can go back in time and listen and learn from those who came before, which is what I did. And when I was a kid, recorded music was only 50 years old. Now it's 100 years old. That is a whole lot more music out there, because when I was a kid, they recorded everything. Everything that had ever been, that could be remembered in history had been recorded. I mean, they went around recording speeches. They went around recording animals and the sounds of frogs and birds. I mean, recording was so new that we wanted to, that they wanted to capture everything that could be recorded. And guys like my dad and Pete Seeger and others realized that as the recording stuff got underway and popular music emerged, that the local flavor of music was disappearing, because local music means that you can usually make fun of somebody in another town, saying we're great, they're really dumb over the hill over there, and you write a song about it. Well, that kind of music was popular for thousands and thousands of years, but you couldn't play those songs, those kinds of stories, to a very broad audience. And so the wit and the wisdom and the humor that had been local didn't always translate nationally. And so nationally, in the popular music, it had to be dumbed down so it wasn't offensive to anyone. And it took some years for that to grow into an art into itself. And it did. I mean, there were great entertainers who crossed all of the borders, all of the lines, and starting, I would say, in probably the 30s, whether it's Bing Crosby or later Frank Sinatra or Elvis or the Stones or the Beatles or whoever you want to talk about, there are always a few who have been able to give you a local feeling about a bigger picture. That's the difficulty today that a lot of young people are dealing with, but it's there. They're doing it. They're working on it. More power to them.
And your show coming up Thursday night in Eau Claire has the same thread there, but describe the performance itself, the actual concert. I understand your son is playing keyboards in the band. Your daughter is opening act. You've put together a pretty good-looking band overall. Describe the show. What are people going to be seeing when they come to the State Theater Thursday night?
Well, if they've ever come to see me before, this is going to be different. I mean, I've showed up in every configuration from whatever's left of me to a big band or anything in between. But for the first time, we're carrying lights that are amazing. We're carrying video. We're carrying photographs that are part of the family archives. We digitized like 70,000 things and picked some of the best ones that related to the songs we were doing. And essentially, it's a show. I mean, it's not just a couple of guys getting on stage singing some songs, although I love that. This ain't that. It's a whole show, and I love the way the whole thing works. It's a beautiful little package. And once this tour is over, that's done. I go back to being me.
Talking with Arlo Guthrie here ahead of the show at the State Theater, 50th anniversary of Alice's Restaurant. And speaking of you, looking back, it's been 50 years, and you've kind of talked about it a little bit, about the nature of that particular work. But how do you overall view this? Now it's a half century of this being in our culture, and are there any particular meanings that fans have described to you over the years that really stand out, that maybe kind of struck you maybe in a different way of, well, I never thought of it that way, that I would interpret it that way? Have any of those come to you?
I don't really think about it that way. I think, the most surprising stuff that happened to me was, even starting with Alice. We sold more Alice's Restaurant records through the PX, through the military, than we did through the record stores. And so I've always had a sort of fan base that was very mixed politically, socially, economically, every other kind of way. That was something I have always treasured. You can go to a rally, you can go to a meeting, you can go to a demonstration, and then everybody there sort of agrees with you in general. But it's rare to go find an audience that is drawn from all of the different segments of who we are as a nation. and have them sit next to each other. That maybe they wouldn't be talking to each other on the street, but they're singing together in a theater. I love that. That spirit of who we are as a country continues not just through me, but through a whole lot of people. And I just feel like that's an important feature on the landscape of who we are. It's important to remember who we are and feel those things. So with songs like City of New Orleans, people may be familiar with from 30 years ago. I love that. But most of all the songs that I've written and recorded were not meant to be popular. They were, I'm a folk singer. I'm not a pop singer. So I stick to the roots. I love the spirit of it, and I love doing that. Every once in a while it peaks and becomes popular, but that's out of the ordinary. So Alice and City of New Orleans coming into Los Angeles from Woodstock, those were all spikes in an otherwise relatively flat career. But it's enough to get me by. It's enough to employ my kids and the people that work with me. I mean, some of the guys in the band have been with me for 40 years. That's a long time. And we've toured, we've played under every circumstance imaginable. We're basically road warriors, and we love doing that. So that will continue no matter whether the particular tour we're on is a big anniversary or celebration or it's just a regular night. And, so we're kind of used to doing what we do. But every once in a while, something, like I said, peaks, something gets drawn out from the ordinary. This is that show. I love doing this. And as much as I love it, I'll be happy when it's over as well and we can get back to being normal. But for right now, we're riding on a good wave.
And a lot of people are going to enjoy it coming up throughout the tour, obviously, but in Eau Claire in particular. Thank you for this interview. This is very insightful. I love chatting with you, and there are going to be people probably like me who just heard the song for the first time today that are going to hear it Thursday night and throughout this tour. Keep sending the message and keep performing. Arlo Guthrie, the Alice's Restaurant 50th Anniversary Tour. Have fun in Eau Claire and have fun on the rest of the tour.
Thanks so much, man. Nice talking with you.